Hi guys, it's Mark Zickery, Mr. Sci-Fi, also known as Mark Zickery of Space Command. And some of you also know that I have credits on Star Trek The Next Generation and Deep Space Nine, etc., Babylon 5, etc. And there's a lot going on with Space Command. If you've been following these videos, subscribe to Mr. Sci-Fi if you haven't. We're building a futuristic car. We're getting ready to shoot the rest of Space Command Forgiveness. We're finishing the 2-hour pilot in post. We're just recorded the Space Command prequel as an audio play with our cast, including Doug Jones, Robert Picardo, Mira Furlan, Bill Mumy, Michael Harney, etc. And lots is coming up. If you want to buy Space Command shares, $7,500 each. The information is down there. You can get a percentage of my profits from Space Command. And also, we have a GoFundMe campaign. We have a Patreon account. All the information is down there. But today, I wanted to memorialize two of the science fiction greats that we've sadly lost in the last few weeks, D.C. Fontana, Dorothy Fontana, and Rene Auberjonois, who played Odo on Deep Space Nine. Now, many of you know that Star Trek was a huge turning point in my life. It debuted, the original one, debuted when I was 10. I met Nichelle Nichols when the show was on the air. She gave me a number of the scripts that were her scripts from Star Trek, including this one. That's Nichelle Nichols' own script, Star Trek. It's Friday's Child, written by D.C. Fontana, and it's signed to me by Dorothy D.C. Fontana. And it was signed many years later when we were on a panel together. And it says Nichelle. All her lines are circled because that's how she would memorize her lines. We just shot a Space Command scene with Nichelle Nichols, which was a huge honor and joy. But when I was growing up with the original Twilight Zone and Outer Limits and Star Trek, I started to notice that a lot of the writers were writing for multiples of those shows. So you started to see the same names: Harlan Ellison, George Clayton Johnson, Theodore Sturgeon, Ray Bradbury, Jerry Soule, etc. And they were my heroes, and I wanted to get to know them. I wanted to meet them. I wanted to learn from them, be mentored by them, have them as my friends. And many of them did, in fact, become friends. And were just great people to know. Just incredibly creative, incredibly talented. They changed the world for the better. And I hope in some small way that my work has done the same, but they inspired me. And one of these writers was a name I started to see on Star Trek, and it was a little curious because the name was D.C. Fontana. Now, I assumed at first that it was a man because, as far as I knew, all the writers for TV were men. But then, as I started to read up on Star Trek, I found out that it was Dorothy Fontana, writing under the name D.C. Fontana, so she would be taken for a man because the executives were men, those who hired were men. But she had started as Gene Roddenberry's secretary. She had worked on a show that Roddenberry did immediately before Star Trek called The Lieutenant. And then she started to sell to TV shows, sell scripts. So Roddenberry gave her a chance to write for Star Trek. She did a great job. She wrote a number of episodes under her name and also rewrote other people's scripts because she became the story editor on Star Trek. And so City on the Edge of Forever by Harlan Ellison, which is considered perhaps the greatest of all the original Star Trek episodes, was rewritten by a number of the people in-house, Gene L. Kuhn and also Dorothy Fontana, who would become one of Harlan's great and close friends. And I knew Dorothy, and I really liked her. She was a great soul and a great person, and in fact, she also helped rebuild the time machine when Bob Burns bought it, and the time machine prop from the great George Pal movie, one of the greatest props ever made, and she was there working on it with the wonderful Bob Burns. And when I was producing Sliders, I brought her in. I brought David Gerald in, another great Star Trek writer, to pitch. We managed to buy a story from David, which was a great episode. Dorothy, it didn't click. Sometimes it just doesn't. The stars aren't in our favor, but it was great to have her in, great to hear her ideas, and I was always very well-favored toward her. I knew that she wrote for the right reasons. I knew that she wrote things that were meaningful. She was just a wonderful person and a wonderful writer, and again, Gene Roddenberry, in so many ways, was cutting edge, having Nichelle Nichols on the show, having George Takei, having Dorothy Fontana become the script editor. I mean, that was incredibly rare back then, and now too, but even more so then. So it's really a shame that we lost Dorothy. She was married to Dennis Skotak, who was one of the Skotak brothers, Dennis and Robert Skotak. They did miniatures and miniature sequences in many of the great science fiction films, including Aliens. And so you can see them on many of the behind-the-scenes featurettes. They're incredibly talented guys and really good-hearted guys, and it was a good marriage between her and Denny Skotak. But again, these are unique people. Once we lose them, we lose them. We've lost Ray Bradbury and George Clayton Johnson recently in recent years, and Forrest Ackerman. Once these people are Ray Harryhausen, once these people are gone, there's no one like them. There's no one to replace them. I certainly know people of my generation and younger who are very colorful, very brilliant, but somehow these founding figures were something more. They were bigger than life. They were on the cutting edge. They were just different, and they were my heroes, and they still are. I'm honored to have known them. I'm honored to have learned from them. I'm honored to have been part of the same industry and tradition that they were part of. And they blazed the trail. They showed the way. And I cannot thank Dorothy enough. I mean, this is one of my prized possessions. Mimeographed, not Xeroxed. I mean, again, these are the blue pages. That means this was a production draft, because they have different colors of pages to indicate which draft it is. And this was the date on this. Let's see if there's a date on it. 5/18/67. So it was written in 1967, written by D.C. Fontana. I mean, just amazing. And that is a treasure. So thank you, Nichelle. Thank you, Dorothy. Now we move on to Rene Auberjonois, who we also lost. Now, Rene Auberjonois, I first became aware of him as an actor when he appeared on Night Gallery. And he was a fairly young man at that point. And then, he didn't do a lot of science fiction for a long time. He was on a TV show called Benson, and it was a hit. And then I became reacquainted with him when we both worked on Deep Space Nine. And he, again, was a terrific actor, just unforgettable, and a really nice man. And I remember one time when I was working on DS9, I was very good friends with Armin Shimmerman, still am. And for some reason, I went over to Rene's house, and Rene mentioned about his house. He said Benson bought this house and Deep Space Nine saved it. So such are the fortunes of an actor. And then when I came up with Far Beyond the Stars, in which the actors got to play 1950s science fiction writers and editors, I went on that set. And initially, when I conceived of it, I thought of Armin Shimmerman being the editor of the science fiction magazine, a la H.L. Gold of Galaxy, and Rene Auberjonois being sort of a blacklisted writer who was kind of slumming in science fiction. But Robert felt, and some of the others I think felt, that it might seem anti-Semitic because the show was about race, and they didn't want to risk that feeling. And so they made Armin Shimmerman the sort of the liberal writer, and they made Rene the editor of the magazine, very much more in the John W. Campbell mode. He was a tall, very austere man with a big nose and great taste. He reinvented science fiction in the 30s and 40s, and Astounding Science Fiction was one of the great science fiction magazines. And John W. Campbell also, of course, wrote Who Goes There, which was made into The Thing, and another great classic of science fiction. So Rene was terrific in that role, terrific. And I'm so proud of that episode. I'm so glad that we got to work together, and that I was in some way responsible for something that's become one of the great episodes in Star Trek history. And then more recently with Rene, I'd planned to cast him in Space Command and also in Sweet Haven, the show I'm creating with Rockne O'Bannon. And sadly, although we talked about it in recent years, I didn't move fast enough. We didn't get to it quickly enough, and I feel very, very sad about that. And there are photos of me and Rene together, and I'm going to, of course, treasure those. And of course, we were on the panel a couple of years ago. There was a panel celebrating the anniversary of Far Beyond the Stars, and we were on a panel together talking about it. And again, that was really something, because we both knew that Deep Space Nine was a landmark, and that we had worked on something worth doing. And so the sad part is that death claims all of our heroes, and ultimately, I'm told, us. Though I'm reading a book on longevity, we'll see what happens. But But the good part is that the work we do lasts and lives after us and moves people and influences people and has meaning. So it's not a life wasted, it's a life well lived, both in our friends, in our spouses, in our experiences, and in our art. So that's about it for now. I'm really glad that we can go back and watch these wonderful episodes that Dorothy wrote and the wonderful episodes that Rene Auberjonois was in. And many of us, because of Star Trek, because of science fiction conventions, many of us got to meet our heroes, Dorothy Fontana, Rene Auberjonois. We get to meet them, we get to talk to them, we get to, share a drink with them, maybe grab a meal with them. It's an honor. So one thing I will say for those of you who are science fiction fans is if you haven't gone to science fiction conventions, go. It's a well worth doing. The science fiction community is very warm, very embracing, and you can meet people whose work you love, and you can and for those of us on the receiving end, you know, it really matters if you come up to us and say, I really love that episode of Star Trek you did, or DS9, or whatever show. It's very meaningful to all of us because um, it's, I won't say it's a rough career, but Hollywood certainly is corrosive, and particularly for actors, they face a lot of rejection, and they may be heroes to us, but they are treated very shabbily by many in this industry. And so if you can say to them, you changed my life, you made me better, you made my life better, that's a great compliment. And so I urge you all to go to conventions and tell people how much you love what they've done. So that's about it for now. We'll be posting a lot more soon. And if I haven't been posting as often as I'd like, simply because I've been so very busy with Space Command and Sweet Haven and all the other things we're doing. We're going to be shooting Ashes, which is a science fiction movie Elaine wrote. We're going to be shooting that probably in the next few weeks. And there's going to be 2019 was a great year thanks to you guys, and 2020 is going to be a great year as well. So I'm very thankful that you're part of this journey with me and that we get to share the wonders of science fiction. So until next time, have a great holiday, have a great time with your life, tell people you love them, and don't be ashamed of what you love. Embrace it. Ray Bradbury told me that he was embarrassed by kids making fun of his Buck Rogers newspaper collection when he was a kid, and he threw it out and realized he had done something terrible. And fortunately, from then on, he kept everything he loved. And someone once heard about that when he was an adult, and they came up after his talk and said, "I collected those strips too, and I'll give them to you." So his collection got returned to him in that way. So we have wonderful people teaching us, wonderful people inspiring us, and we can pass along the torch. We can pay it forward. So see you next time, and thanks very much for everything you do and are. Take care. Bye, guys.